Okay, let's stay on schedule today, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. My name is Thomas Meredith, and I'm the Senior Marketing Director for RTM Consulting, and I'll be moderating today. So on behalf of RTM Consulting, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, PSA 2.0, What is Driving the Needs of Service Organizations Today? As I normally do here at the start, let me begin and cover a few housekeeping items, get those out of the way. A copy of the deck is going to be made available. If you're interested in receiving a copy, please email your request to info@rtmconsulting.net and we'll send it out to you. That email address again is info@rtmconsulting.net and we can get a PDF copy sent over to you. We are recording the webcast, so once we get it archived and up on the site, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. That will be an automated email similar to the ones you received with your reminders. So it's an automated email from GoToWebinar, which will have a link to the recording. Feel free to view that again at your convenience or pass it along to someone in your organization who was not able to join us today. As always, we are taking questions. We'll have a brief Q&A session at the end of the webcast. We don't stop the webinar to answer any questions, but there is a questions panel there on your GoToWebinar window. So, if a slide comes up early on, you see something, go ahead and enter in that question. I'll track those and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Okay, that covers it for me. So let me get out of the way. Presenting today's webinar is Managing Partner Mark LaCroix. And from TSIA, the Technology Services Industry Association, is John Ragsdale. John is Vice President, Technology and Social Research. Mark, welcome. We'll start with you.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks, John, for joining. Hi, everybody. So as Thomas mentioned, look forward to spending the next hour sharing a little bit of our thoughts around PSA, Professional Service Automation, and really what's driving the needs of services organizations today. Our outline today, just going to start with the brief introductions of ourselves and then talk a little bit about PSA in general, just defining the space, laying the foundation. Then we're going to get into more of this concept of what we're calling PSA 2.0 and what really that means. And then we'll kind of finish with some related thoughts about keys to successful implementations and use of PSAs in general. What I hope to cover as objectives, one is to help you understand the background of the PSA market and its enablement of service delivery organizations. So some of you might be coming from a variety of different roles and backgrounds, but if you're in a delivery organization, chances are you're either touching a PSA, should be touching a PSA, or of course getting a lot of leverage out of some version of automation to help you better execute your business, really at any scale. Hope to share with you some of the key trends driving the needs of service organizations today. Again, the idea of 2.0 means there's a fair amount of change afoot out there, and we hope to share a little bit of that with you. And learn what some of the PSA vendors are doing to address these needs. Again, there's a lot of innovation going on as well. I want to share what we're seeing in the marketplace. And last, just talk a little bit about futures in the direction of PSA and PSA enablement. So, by way of introduction, that's me. I guess there's a picture on the front page as well. I mean, short of it on me is I've been a delivery person pretty much most of my career. Started out as an actual active practitioner doing consulting, professional service delivery. Eventually was manager, leader of PS orgs, and now I've been working with RTM Consulting for the last 8+ years, working with a number of companies in improving their execution of service delivery. I particularly actually manage our professional services practice as well as our technology practice, and that technology practice encompasses working with customers on PSA solutions and optimization. For those of you who are not familiar with RTM Consulting, we've been around for about 9 years now. We're a management consulting firm solely focused on the services organizations. Our tagline there is really helping service organizations get better at what they do. So we bring a whole range of services and capabilities to bear to make that happen. And again, the reason we're talking about PSAs is one of our areas we focus on is is automation optimization through technology. And in this particular case, we're focused on PSAs. Joining me is John Ragsdale. I'll ask John to quickly introduce himself so you guys could hear his voice. You can put some voice behind the words here.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I head up the Technology and Social Research at the Technology Services Industry Association, or TSIA. And TSIA works with the service organizations of high-tech companies, help them optimize their processes, get their organizations in shape. We do a lot of benchmarking to help them identify strengths and weaknesses across financials and quality, as well as basic operational issues. So I've been with TSIA since 2006. I'm in my 10th year now, and before that I spent 6 years at Forrester Research. Prior to that, I worked for a number of companies here in Silicon Valley in the call center and CRM space, and I'm very happy to say I finally managed to publish my first book in 2012 and was a contributing author to a book on social business that came out last year. So while my background is mostly in the customer service space, it's really interesting how popular professional services automation has become. And in my research at TSIA, I cover 42 categories of technology, and PSA is the second most popular topic with all of our members and the inquiries I receive. So it's very top of mind. I know a lot of people are shopping for new technology. So I'm very happy to be here today, and again, thanks for joining us. So Mark, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, John, and so glad to have John on as my straight man. As you can see from what he tracks, what he covers, it brings a tremendous amount of knowledge and research. So if you've got some related or ancillary information needs, don't hesitate to reach out to him. All right, so let's talk just a little bit about PSA foundationally here, just kind of laying the groundwork for, I assume some of you out there have varying degrees of exposure and knowledge to these applications, but really it's a category of software designed to meet the specific needs of project-based, people-centric service delivery organizations or enterprises. And fundamentally, what that means is service delivery project basis, you're talking about the domains of projects and people. And it's the interaction of putting people and projects together is how organizations tend to make money. I say that in the most generic sense because I don't want to be so narrow to say this is just about professional services organizations. This is about consulting shops, staff augmentation shops, and some various solution providers and things like that have come together in a project-based way. So this, as we'll talk about in a minute, kind of can bleed over into other type organizations, but like development, others, but largely those aren't always project-based, and this fits best when we're doing. I didn't purposely add client delivery, but it's best suited, of course, when you are doing client delivery, because it truly is an end-to-end application or a category of application. It really captures things from pursuit, plan, deliver, and all the way to bill, getting paid for what you do. And so what I try to get across to people, and I think people are understanding this more and more now over the last couple of years, is that really a PSA is not a niche tool. It is not something you're just wedging into an otherwise crowded application environment in your enterprise. This is, if you're predominantly a delivery organization, this should be one of your primary end-to-end tools. It should be handling a lot of the activity that your organization's doing. Functionally, this is what PSAs generally cover. Some, at varying degrees of depth, and others a little lighter in some of these areas. At the core, I would say project management, resource management, time and expense management have been really the long-standing cores of this. But related and a key feeder, of course, is sales and opportunity management, knowledge management, and I guess I should also say from a core standpoint, financial management. Invoicing has long been a key focus for these. But as you can see, this is, again, not a niche product. It's taking everything from sales opportunities to actually delivery execution, ultimately to getting bills out the door. And then, of course, not to be understated, the reporting dashboarding data down below, right? Having a window into our business and how we're managing and operating the business. So again, a lot of functionality, but generally, again, in the PSA category, tends to hold form in terms of capabilities in all these areas to some varying degree.
Hey, Mark, I'd like to ask you a question on this slide. I know we're going to talk later in the webinar about successfully launching PSA, but what I often hear is companies, especially those implementing PSA for the first time, it's a little overwhelming because there are so many functional modules to consider. Where do you see people tending to start, or where do you tell people they should focus? Because you obviously can't focus on everything and boil the ocean. What do you see the most popular areas to focus on first?
That's a good question. You know, it goes back to the previous slide where it says discipline projects, right? Because that's really the core of what we're doing. It's about managing people efficiently, keeping them sufficiently targeted, you know, utilized and productive. At the same time, run good projects. And to me, that's really the core of running a profitable enterprise is, you know, manage a good project portfolio and keep your bench relatively clean and at target. You know, getting bills out the door is important, but that's really what's going to drive your profitability. So I tend to emphasize get that part right, you know, and build out from there.
Yeah, interestingly, not to overgeneralize, but I tend to see North American companies starting on the resource management side. And interestingly, I see the European companies tend to start on the financial management side. I think that a lot of European companies are very ERP-centric. They've got the SAP mindset. Mm-hmm. So I think that may be contributing to that. But I see those as the two areas people seem to be struggling with the most when they come to me for a technology recommendation.
Yeah, good point. Well, I'd say you've been doing some research in that area, and so maybe, John, you can elaborate a little bit on some of these data points that you've come up with.
Absolutely. So each year I do the global technology research. I just completed that study in its 11th year, which is pretty amazing. And one of the areas I track is PSA, and I have some data here showing how the adoption has been climbing. And interestingly to me, back in 2011, you know, everybody was using Excel pretty much to run their PS organization. And every time a TSIA member went through the benchmarking process with Bo DiMuccio, who's our VP of Research for Professional Services, every one of those benchmarking members would come to me for a technology discussion because they always needed help with metrics that were greatly impacted by PSA, such as utilization rates and rate realization. The adoption has been climbing pretty dramatically. As we see, it's been going up and up each year. I'll be releasing the 2016 data at our Technology Services World Conference in a couple of weeks in San Diego. But what I'm starting to see now, I have some data here from that from the new report showing that in 2016-2017, over the next 2 years, 72% of PS organizations have budget for new or additional PSA. So you're asking, you know, why are they continuing to spend when adoption is already reaching pretty high levels? And the answer is that a lot of early adopters have now outgrown their initial PSA tool, and they're looking for something a little more robust, a little more scalable to meet the needs of their larger and growing organization. So, you know, in the early days, it was a trade-off between Excel and a PSA tool. Today, the majority of companies do have a PSA tool in place. As we just were talking about, there is a lot of functional capabilities there. So I think that a lot of companies are rolling maybe a part of the application, not really taking advantage of all of those capabilities. And I'll be talking in a little bit about some of the new innovations coming down the pike. But I'm happy to say that the conversations have turned. I'm no longer having to acquaint people with what PSA is and why they should use it. They're usually coming to me for recommendations on how they can go to the next level. So I think that's a good indicator that this market is seeing some maturity. So Mark, let me turn it back to you to talk about PSA 2.0.
Thanks, John. So yeah, let's get into what by PSA 2.0. Now, as John was just saying, first let's talk about, by talking 2.0, you got to have a 1.0, right? Well, what does 1.0 mean to us? Well, it really was the initial wave of PS automation over the last decade or so. I mean, pick your time, but it's a period of adoption innovation that was mostly characterized by some early adopters. So you had some early vendors that had defined the niche. You had people like OpenAir and Quick Arrow and ChangePoint and others that were in the game, so to speak, and still in some cases, defining the space, and others kind of moving into the space. And you had some folks that really, a handful of customers and companies that kind of understood what the need was and were those early adopters. In many cases, you talk about what were people what were they trying to get functionally from these? I would say, enabling the basics. Back then, I would say it was very much about time and getting bills out the door. That's probably the most common theme that I see or have seen from the clients I've worked with is what I implemented 8 years ago, 7 years ago. It kept the lights on. It kept just keeping track of where everybody was, where their time was going, and how to turn that into bills to get out the door. Everything else was, a nice to have at that point. So that's what I kind of mean by enabling the basics. And of course, it was also the period characterized by a fair amount of vendor confusion. So again, PSA 1.0, as John was just alluding to, was really people moving off of spreadsheets and starting to recognize that there is a actual viable application category that can serve my business's needs. And it was that kind of growing awareness and moving away from homegrown and spreadsheets. But to drill in on that vendor confusion a little bit, and it still exists today to some degree, it's worth highlighting to say, when I first started getting my head around this space a number of years ago, this was me. I was looking at this picture going, what are all these acronyms? I know the acronyms, but what do they all do? There's a lot of vendors out there. When you really bring into to play the ERP vendors, the PPM vendors, those are two really big categories of software, tracked by Gartner and others that have a ton of vendors in there. Many of them make overtures that they can support your service delivery organization's needs in the same way that a PSA could, and so it creates a lot of confusion. There's also enterprise pressure from your company to say, why do we need to buy an incremental product or application when you should just be able, the PPM or the ERP or something like that will get you 65% of the way there, right? Time entry is time entry. SAP has that for financials, right? Why can't we just put that straight into there? Well, as we hopefully have matured and grown to learn that sharing a enterprise system does not always go far to meet our specific business needs. John, do you want to comment, or do you find that you share or get some of the same confusion and feedback from people that you talk to?
Oh, yeah, this slide represents a lot of the conversations I have with companies, and it is a very confusing market. The PPM thing causes a lot of confusion because, not to name call here, but specifically when IT goes to the Gartner analysts and asks them, tell me about PSA, the PPM analyst at Gartner says it's the same thing, just use PPM. Now, if you were to talk to the PSA analyst at Gartner, you would get a very different message. But I end up refereeing these fights between the business users and IT because IT, as you said, wants to just keep using the one tool they already have, and they're a hammer looking for a nail. And the other confusion is on the SRP side. There's one vendor in particular that has both a PSA and an SRP offering in the market, and they have competing sales teams selling these solutions. So you can get a sales pitch from the company on two different solutions that are overlapping, and it becomes very confusing. So, I would say, you need to find a subject matter expert such as RTM. If you're a TSI member, Bo DiMuccio and I are happy to talk to you too. But make sure that the business users aren't being steamrolled by IT into a tool that ultimately doesn't fit their needs because someone somewhere told them that PPM and SRP are the same as PSA. Because I know it's very confusing, but trust me, the missing capabilities, the integration links, the usability is going to be lacking, and I think you're ultimately going to struggle to get the outcome you need from your investment if you go with one of these close to but not quite platforms.
So PSA 2.0, I view it as the recent wave of activity occurring in service delivery automation today. So I would say probably the trend started a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's hard to always put an exact time frame on, but I would characterize it as activity over the last couple of years, and I would say we're right at the peak or in the middle of this wave of activity. It gets characterized by a couple things. I'll go into more detail on each of these, but one, driven by disruptive market dynamics. Two, driven by changing customer needs. And whether it's leading or reacting to or a little both, vendor innovation. And so all these three are characterizations of what's going on with PSA 2.0 and the concept that we're talking about. So we'll go into each one in a little more detail here. So disruptive market dynamics, there's three. No surprise, cloud. Cloud, both from the standpoint of what your organization may be going through. A lot of companies that we work with, I know that John talks to and works with, are product companies, software product companies that certainly the cloud direction is changing the operating model in your company. But it's also, of course, changed the operating model of the vendors and providers of software to you and your organization. And that's been very disruptive. It goes without saying that when you've had a hosted premise-based solution for a number of years, changing that, replacing it, swapping it, was a fairly daunting task and wasn't taken lightly. But with cloud solutions that lower that cost of entry, it certainly got many people to think, well, I can now kind of look and not actually have to necessarily justify such a spend to consider alternatives and changes. So the entry and switching costs went way down, which really kind of opened, I think, a little bit of the floodgates of people kind of going back to the market and exploring and looking at their options. The advent of mobile, right? So these are, again, things that are happening at a macro level that are trickling their way down to your needs as well as what the marketplace is doing in the space. You're demanding and the mobile capability and platforms have really moved into the mainstream. And while they've been around for a number of years, with smartphones, tablets, and every hybrid in between, more and more business is being conducted off of these devices. So we no longer are going to a big chunky PC at our desk and having to do our work through there. And so we need more and more nimble and next generation capabilities to support a more mobile set of platforms. And last is virtualization, and I mean this in terms of the workforce, not actually the computing infrastructure virtualization. It's what I call the death of the water cooler. I mean, when I first started, consulting back for a big five, we moved the water cooler, right? So we sent 30, 40 people on a plane to every 4 days a week for 5 months to do our engagement. Well, that's of course slowly been going away, or more quickly than not. But I would say now, the world is flat, and we are, located. Our teams are located anywhere and everywhere, and so we are truly operating as virtual teams now as a standard rule, not the exception. And so what we need from our solutions is a tremendous amount of flexibility, the ability to, tie people together through all these different locations, geographies, entities, if you will, because we're organizing also in a lot of creative different ways as a result of this. So that drives the need for more collaboration, as well as the need to tie the different teams together more effectively through effective computing. Now, that's kind of the market stuff. What's going on in terms of what we're seeing changing customer needs? So this comes from actually working with clients. Again, John mentioned he takes a lot of queries, questions, and discussions with customers in terms of what they're looking for. Same here at RTM. What forms the basis for why customers are sticking their head up and looking to potentially change their current situation in terms of their automation support. First is greater visibility and predictability. Key metrics and measurements are not as useful when looking at it through the rearview mirror, and that's what we tend to have done a good job of in the past. Is we've got great reporting that tells us how we did last month or how last month, but an effective PSA should actually enable you to look more forward with more visibility to better predict and plan future direction, right? So you hear now more talk about what's my predictive utilization, what's my forecast, financial forecast, what's my resource forecast, what are my needs 3 months out, right? So getting more predictive and forward-looking is really where you want to be now. In areas like forecasting, backlog, resource forecasting, utilization, project status, right? So again, forward-looking versus looking in the rearview mirror. A lot of the infrastructure today, or a lot of reasons why people are trying to change their infrastructure, has all been geared and wired to reporting on what's happening at the moment or happening in the near past, but not looking forward enough. Capacity planning. We at RTM Consulting have since day one always been huge fans and proponents of good resource management, and really capacity management. We also call it resource forecasting. It, to us, has always been kind of the ultimate goal or a key component, if you will, of a well-run resource management function, because you have to be able to anticipate and look into the future to really run your organization well, right? We have demand, we have supply. We have to keep supply and demand married up and into the future. And only by being able to actively manage our capacity, and by that, what our current capacity as well as our future capacity needs are you really going to achieve the goal of right person, right place, right time? Again, many of you are in probably 65, 75% of the people that I work with are, definitely have more demand than they have supply, which is the proverbial good problem to have. But, you're stifling your business when you consistently don't have the right people, you're short people, or you put, lesser skilled, less experienced people in roles, you're stretching yourself very thin, and it leads to bad delivery, it leads to, poor customer satisfaction, a whole host of needs. People are very aware of that, and quite honestly, I think it's getting to a point, tipping point where everybody's like, we have to solve that. And again, I've worked with a number of fairly large global organizations that they really have no capacity planning capability in at all. And they're finally realizing they have to make that a priority. Data-driven management. Now, there's a lot of, I'll call it, BI, big data companies out there, software companies, and a lot of great innovation going on, of course, in the category of big data. And what I've learned by working with those companies and kind of understanding their philosophy of this whole data-driven management is the idea of managing with the end in mind. And so that's really different than some of us that have kind of made a career of doing, let's say, more traditional solution building of waterfall or even agile, where we're understanding business and functional requirements, and then we'll design those and we'll come up with good solutions. But the way other people look is, how do you want to run your business? What data do you need to make decisions, both operationally and strategic? And let me design a solution that's going to bring you that critical data to run your business. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in function, but I have to think of function as it relates to, in the end, providing you the data you need to make decisions that run your business. So it's an interesting mindset that I'm seeing more and more of now, which is driving people's need to have more reporting, more dashboarding, more visibility into key metrics and KPIs, right? So this idea of I realize I have project managers and resource managers and delivery leaders and financial people keying information into the system that are getting the day-to-day work done. But what's been lacking, or what people are clamoring for now, is I need all of this data brought to me as a manager, a leader, as a regional leader, to understand all the critical data I need to do to make the right decisions for the business. Right? Gone should be the days, or we're trying to get rid of the days, where we're kind of flying blind or flying on feel, or every report's an ad hoc report that takes a lot of manual effort to generate. But the requirements now coming from customers are, I want to take advantage of all this data, and I want to, brought to me efficiently and effectively so I can manage with the end in mind. And the last one, and it probably has always been the case, so it's just probably underscoring something that's kind of always been there, even in the 1.0s, we're constantly striving for greater productivity. So what's going on in here? What are some of the couple of the areas of productivity people are focused on? Well, one is mobile, right? So think of just 2 years ago, maybe 3. My friends and vendors out there can correct me, but the first native smartphone mobile apps for time entry probably just came out 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But what a game changer, right? I was a consultant, probably mentioned that already, and I'm sorry if I mentioned it too many times, but I understand what it's like to be in an airport on Friday afternoon or Thursday night, tired as heck, and knowing that you got to, it's Friday afternoon and you're being told you've got to get your time in before the end of the week. Otherwise, you're out of compliance. You're going to show up on a report. There's nothing more, kind of frustrating and demoralizing and say, I got to go home at Friday evening, got to boot back up my computer, I got to key in my time, and maybe I got to put expense, right? That's just a killer. Well, I'm sitting in the airport waiting for my flight, and in about 5 minutes, I can put it all in, and I'm done. It's a huge, huge game changer. Now, they're not just stopping there, of course, moving to tablets, doing expenses, task management, providing visibility to managers on key data, things like that. So again, greater access is making people more productive, and pushing those capabilities out is really, going on right now. It's supporting standardization. Continue to see organizations trying to standardize around common delivery methods, methodologies, tools, templates. I mean, everybody, of course, at some point realizes that, hey, we should be doing our delivery in a consistent, standard way. Well, it's hard to throw all that into SharePoint and just expect everybody to kind of go pull the right template at all the right time. And more now, underpinning your desire to standardize through the system is becoming a greater emphasis for productivity. And last, just to better automate long-running or manual processes. I've probably heard more in the last couple of years horror stories about month-end close than I care to shake a stick at. I mean, I'm hearing horror stories like each month-end takes 5, 6, 7 days to actually close, and with a lot of manual effort, a lot of cane beating going on in the process. Whether it's getting all the timesheets in compliance, and then going through and making a lot of manual adjustments here and there to tweak the numbers and different things like that. It's very much a hybrid manual automated process. Revenue forecasting as well, one that's a critical process, but has typically taken a long time or a lot of manual effort to actually get the number right, and not relying as much on sophisticated automation and technology to do that. And similar invoicing. So again, there's still a lot of processes out there that have not been sufficiently automated, whether it's because the functionality of PSAs 5, 6, 7 years ago didn't contemplate some of the complexities that we're dealing with now. We've got different delivery models and things like that, or companies have kind of got a little stuck in their ways, and those wagon tracks those ruts have gotten a little deeper, and you have to finally break the mold and say, look, I think we can kind of blow this up and automate it, and also improve the processes as we go. So again, a number of different changing needs that are also, again, driving a lot of activity in the PSA space right now. And then, as I mentioned, third, vendor innovation, right? So it's not to say the vendors are sitting idly by, not doing anything. And so I'd like to ask John then to speak to this slide and share some of the things that he's seeing that the vendors are doing with their software products for you guys.
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of interesting innovation going on outside of the core resource management, project accounting in PSA. And I think a lot of it is linked to the changing project profiles that we're seeing implementation teams tasked with. So, of course, the biggest change over the last 10 years for the B2B tech companies that TSIA works with is the shift to the cloud. So we're working with companies who have always been 100% on-premise technology, and now they're moving to cloud tools. And what does that mean for PS? What do consultants do in a cloud world? And two of the big impacts that we're seeing, first, traditionally with on-premise tools, you had pay-as-you-go custom projects. And today, the pendulum is swinging, and now more than 50% of projects, according to our PS benchmark, are predefined, repeatable consulting offerings. As you know, with a lot of cloud products, when you buy the product, sign up for the subscription, you're given sort of three options. You can do the little or no implementation, just out of the box. You can do a basic customization where they match your colors and your corporate fonts and some basic formatting. And then C would be a more intensive implementation with some multiple integration points, maybe some process work internally as well. But they're predefined, and you pick from this menu which implementation option you want. And the other factor on shifting to the cloud is that more projects are being handled remotely. You don't have to go on site. The technology is not on site. There may be a small on-site component to gather requirements and do some process optimization, but more and more projects and larger components of projects are done externally. So because of this shift, it's putting more focus on some new areas, things like collaboration and knowledge management. We also have a younger breed of consultants entering the workforce that are very social and collaboration minded. So they want an online community or something like a chatter feature in Salesforce to easily communicate with the team, ask questions, share tips and tricks, etc., and capture some great lessons learned in some repository from a knowledge management standpoint, so consultants doing a future project that has a similar profile can leverage those previous learnings and not reinvent the wheel. Integration is important. We talked earlier about resource planning and resource forecasting, and one big element here is plugging your PSA to your CRM so it can start getting a look at all of the projects being quoted, what's being accepted, what's being quoted and rejected. It could be that there are some training classes you need to provide to sales on how to better present the projects you want to do. So if they find that they're always selling something that maybe your margins aren't great on that project, or the customer sat isn't always great on that project, you may need to do some education to help them better position the types of projects you do want to execute on. But also that tie to CRM will allow you to start doing some reporting on what are the likely projects going to be 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, in case you're starting to see a certain type of project trending up that you may not have a lot of resources for. You may need to do some cross-training, bring in some new talent, etc. So customer journey analytics, consumption analytics, those are two very interesting areas as well. A few years ago, we didn't even ask in the PS benchmark about customer satisfaction with projects because so few companies were measuring it. But today, it's a very common element that we're tracking satisfaction with the project, not only at the end, but at each milestone along the way, allowing you time to correct issues if there are any. So part of that customer journey is, surveying customers, gathering input, and factoring that into long-term account planning. And I'll finally touch on consumption analytics. This is a big piece of customer success, and the largest percentage of customer success employees come from professional services. And that may be a surprise to a lot of you, but the key in customer success is not just knowing the technology, it's understanding how companies leverage the technology. And PS is one of the few groups, if not the only group in the company, that really understands how different companies and different industries, companies of different size, are leveraging the tools internally, what business problems they're using, what types of people are using what features, etc. And that type of business savvy is critically important when you're trying to understand customer adoption and consumption. So we are seeing elements of consumption analytics being introduced at the time of implementation to make it easier down the road to measure how your customers are consuming the tools, if they're maybe behind where they should be, you know they're not getting the business value that they expected, and that's going to run into problems when the maintenance agreement comes due or the cloud subscription contract comes due. So it's a really important thing to keep an eye on. So I've got some spending data here. Again, this is from the 2016 survey. I'll be releasing this in 2 weeks in San Diego at our conference. But typically in the past, we saw high planned spending around professional services automation, but not always a lot of planned spending on these different areas. But you can see continued investment in CRM, customer experience analytics, knowledge management, communities, collaboration, a lot of pent-up spending planned for the next couple of years. So, Mark, I think that's probably good job security for both of us.
Yeah, sounds good to me. So hopefully at this point, you're listening and saying, where do I fit, right? Is my organization in 1.0 land, or am I in the middle of what they're describing as 2.0, or maybe I'm at 1.5, or maybe, maybe you're, even ahead of the curve. But one of the things that I want to share as well is just a little bit of a caveat in terms of keys to success. So, from where I sit, I'm not a vendor of this software. I'm trying to help people get the most out of it. And so, of course, when you think about what we're doing here in process alignment, I would say when you're moving from 1.0 to 2.0, I would say be willing to blow a few things up and break some glass. I've seen and worked with some companies, actually one of them will be speaking at the show coming up, is they took on the processes and they said, look, if we're going to go through this, we're going to do it, and we're going to fix some of the things that are broken with our own business model or our own business process. You have to keep in mind also that if you look at these 4 areas, these are 4 significant areas with 4 different stakeholders, right? Time management are all the consultants, resource management, financial management, you got the whole back office and the financial team that exerts a lot of influence and power, and they have all the project managers and that organization. Well, this all comes together when you put people on projects and start assigning people out to do work and then ultimately bill for them. And so the point being is that all these processes are interrelated. And I see too often that people go at these solutions looking at each different stakeholder and saying, how do you want to do things? How do you want to do things? And they can't actually, serve everybody at once when they kind of look at everybody independently. Or maybe one group exerts too much influence and gets too much of their needs met to the detriment of one of the other groups. And so the point is 2 things. One, blow some processes up. Take advantage of the opportunity, because whatever you put in 5 years ago needs to be revisited. Second is help balance the needs of all these different areas, because again, many of the solutions, the PSA solutions, it's all somewhat interconnected. And to get the most out of your solution, you've got to reconcile all the different groups and how they're going to coexist together in the system. And second is, change management adoption. So these last 2 concepts are, not revolutionary by any means, but worth underscoring, in light of what we're talking about. Because with 2.0, it does mean making a change. And even the smallest change, even though you think it's a tremendous improvement, you can't take that too lightly. Now, teaching a consultant how to use a smartphone and input time may be your easiest task, but getting project managers to even change slightly their behavior is certainly something we can't take too lightly. but also to take the, to get the most benefit out of what we're investing in and doing, and more importantly, that big data at the back end, right? When we talk about managing the business proactively, gaining visibility, having the data and reports and dashboards to run our business, it takes good adoption because we need good data in the system to do that. We can't take for granted that just because the functionality is there, that the field's going to actually do what we want. And so it takes time, takes focus, and traditionally what I see is mostly underutilized, underadopted capability, which means it's either too complex, not usable enough, or people just haven't sufficiently been kind of trained and driven to use the system as we envision. So again, continue to emphasize that, especially in this mode where again you're trying to go through an upgrade or a swap out or something, is take this part seriously. One of the things that I mentioned early on about these low switching costs is true, right? To consider going from to another solution that is in the cloud, you look at it and go, wow, I just have to make a smaller commitment, a monthly subscription fee. My implementation costs seem to be pretty reasonable. So this whole thing I'm going to get away with going pretty cheap. Well, what happens is people get a little bit lulled into that low price point and don't invest in any of these two areas. They choose to kind of cut corners and say, well, let's just get it out there. And it is pretty intuitive, so people start to figure it out, and we'll just kind of learn as we go. And that is an approach, but it doesn't mean that you got to, shelve the idea of process improvement and change management. My vendor friends will up and running in pilot mode, and I don't disagree with that. But don't make that your change management strategy. Don't make that your process improvement strategy. Make it part of a broader approach.
Hey, Mark, if I could make a comment about the adoption, that's something I hear quite a bit. Companies have invested heavily in this technology, and they're finding consultants either aren't using it or they're not using it as much as they should. One of our members had great success by using incentives. Yes, they're bribing people to use the tool, and the approach they used was they rolled out these mobile capabilities and found that in particular, some of the older consultants were kind of dragging their feet and using these new mobile tools. So what they started was a program that said, if you will file your project updates and your expenses by 5 p.m. on Friday from your mobile app, you will automatically get 10% of your bonus for the quarter if you do that every Friday. And they went from something like 30% participation to 100% participation because there was money linked to participating in using the technology. So think of some creative things like that. Money is a great motivator, and I always talk about the carrot and the stick. It's great to have some incentives like that, but also make sure that there's something in their MBOs about effective use of technology. So you've got something to ding them on their annual review if they're not adopting the tools. So that's my 2 cents on adoption.
Great, thanks. So looking ahead, right? So as I characterize it, I think we're in the middle of 2.0. How long that cycle is remains, to be seen. Maybe another couple of years. So what does 3.0 look like? Well, I'll only just offer a couple, and John may add his 2 cents as well. Some of it I think goes a little bit to the list John spoke to, and the question is how much of some of what the vendors are innovating around might they be pushing it into the market and letting the market take advantage of it. But I do believe that integrating more collaboration and really flattening the workforce out and bringing more people into the system and leveraging that information. I just still see today groups are in different roles and they have different permissions to do specific things. But I can envision where that gets a little flatter. More employees, more staff get access to more things to make them more productive and gain more visibility into certain aspects of the business. And then I also think that what's evolving is, and not fully mature at this stage, is where PSA fits in the enterprise architecture. John emphasized integration. I think that is starting to find its place and mature, that PSA is a prominent end-to-end component in the architecture of your company, and it coexists with, with the different pieces of financials and CRM. And I think IT organizations are starting to better understand that. And so I see then better focus on the right integration, which sometimes can be a little challenging today. But I see, more maturity and more improvements in those systems working more easily together. John, did you have any futures thinking on where it might be headed?
Well, I think we're going to continue to see things like mobility and analytics and communities collaboration, making an impact. We're hearing a lot about retiring baby boomers and the fact that we're going to be hiring a lot of new younger workers in the next 3 to 5 years. They're going to bring with them some very different attitudes about the workplace and the technology, and they're very open to automation and trying new things. So, I would say keep an eye on what's cool and what's interesting. If you're attending our TSW conference in a couple of weeks, we've got 4 or 5 professional services automation providers exhibiting in the expo, and all of them have something unique. So spend some time looking at their mobile capabilities, their dashboarding capabilities, what they're doing with analytics, what CRM systems they're able to plug into, and keep an eye on what's new and what's different, because I think there's some really interesting things coming down the pike that ultimately is going to help us with some core metrics like utilization rates.
Great. Well, I won't spend a lot of time on wrap-up, but we're getting down to the wire here. So I hope you really took in the idea that there's a lot going on in the PSA market. Some of the needs of folks like you and your organizations are really driving that, combined with some of the innovations coming from the vendors. And again, my plug of, don't forget process alignment and change management to really get the most out of this potential, move that you would contemplate. As John mentioned, I do want to plug, we've got time for a little bit of time for questions, but I do want to emphasize for those of you that either are able to attend the TSW show in San Diego coming up on May 2nd, John and I, along with a couple other delivery leaders who have just are in the middle or going through this process that really exemplify 2.0 and really what it kind of means by the business demands of X as a service. So it's going to be a very interesting session. It's going to be structured that it's really panel discussion as well as audience participation, audience sharing your perspectives and stories as well. So expect it to be very much a good dialogue. So I would ask you to, if you're attending, great, or if your organization and company is a member, pass this along and encourage them to join as well. Look forward to getting a good crowd there and a good discussion. So with that, Tom, I think we got time for maybe a couple questions. So we could give you guys a minute. Please, Thomas, you can tell them how they can, remind them how they can ask questions. John and I can see what we got out there.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Nice job, gentlemen. Some more forward-thinking content there, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. We've had a few questions come in. We'll take the rest of the time here before the top of the hour to answer any more that you might have. So go ahead and submit those in your GoToWebinar panel there. And I just wanted to let anybody on the line know for our RMCPs who joined us today, there is a PCU credit. Thank you, Mark. There is a PCU credit that you can get for attending today's webcast for our resource management certified professionals out there. So there's the information there on your screen. So Mark, yeah, we did get a few questions in. I got one here for you, and he was talking about the size of his organization. He said he has a smaller organization, around 125 staff or so. And do these ideas on PSA 2.0 only apply to large organizations, or does he need all of this too?
So, yeah, it's kind of a question that always seems to come up. At what point am I ready for automation? We John had mentioned, we used to have the conversation of when is the time to get off spreadsheets. And I think that again, but that was 3, 4, 5 years ago, and it was getting off spreadsheets to go to what? Now with, I'll combine that with saying now that we have cloud solutions, the entry cost and the fact that these solutions are tailored to the scale of your organization. So if you have a lot of users, then you'll pay more. If you have a low number of users, you pay less. So it's not a skewed investment model like it may have been back in the day when you were buying a premise license. So I'd say that if anything, it made the bar go even lower. I might have said in the past, 30, 40, or 50 person organization or delivery staff, you should strongly consider it. Now I would say, why not 10? Why not 15? Why not 20? So
right.
The solutions themselves and the availability of those have made it very easy for even small organizations to take on and then allow it to scale with them.
Right. Great point. Another one coming in here, and it's about these companies implementing 2.0 and implementing their second PSA installment, so to speak. So John, maybe I'll send this one over to you. What are some of the limitations that you have seen that these companies are facing that is leading them to go, okay, yeah, I need to make this change? Are there things boiling to the top, a few things floating to the top?
Yeah, absolutely. The first place we usually see people running up against limitations is on reporting and dashboards, and requirements for analytics are becoming much more complex. There's a lot more data scientists available today to within companies to help them create some very sophisticated proactive dashboards, for example, showing what's going on in projects so you can make small adjustments before things get completely off kilter, and that requires some pretty strong capabilities, and a lot of the early systems simply don't have the sophisticated capabilities to do that. Another area that's driving a lot of spending is CRM integration, and the initial products were standalone. You could do some custom integration, but it was a little expensive and complex to maintain. Today, more than half of TSIA members are on the Salesforce CRM platform, and if you go to AppExchange, there's 4 or 5 PSA products out there now that are pre-integrated, some even built on the Force.com platform. So depending on what CRM product you're using, there's an ecosystem for each one with vendors offering a pre-integration package. And I think that's another thing that's driving, because I see a lot of companies move to a new CRM platform, usually in the cloud, and that sort of forces them to move to a new PSA platform that comes integrated. So I'd say those are the 2 areas I hear most common.
Okay, great, thank you. Hope that helps with that question. One more, this one just came in. I'll send this one over to you, Mark. She works in a software company. All product orders and invoicing is done in their ERP. How does the PSA fit in my model?
So this is, that's kind of the common problem, I would say, with the 1.0 story that I was saying before, where the enterprise kind of believes, and John, I thought, spoke to this well too, that that ERP is, really can be bent and sliced and used for the purposes of PS. And so that what you commonly hear is, well, we already do our product orders and invoicing on the product from here, and they have the service capability. Why can't we just, manage projects and do some of that stuff here? And I think that, that's kind of, again, the old way of thinking. There's severe limitations that you run into when you try to have the ERP run your services business. You don't have the flexibility in the way you actually define revenue, in the various different ways in which we're setting up projects and how we earn revenue these days, the ability to actually, kind of map and define different ways to generate invoices, and want to define our services. You inevitably run into limitations when you try to look for the equivalent feature and functionality in these ERP systems. So again, I'm glad you pointed out, because it's what John and I highlighted, is it's a common trap to get kind of pushed and forced into just leveraging the systems that are already there supporting the product infrastructure.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I've got a minute past the hour, so I do want to stick to the allotted time. And first, I do want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webcast. I appreciate that. And also to Mark and John, thank you for your time and sharing your expertise, and John sharing some of your research. So with that, we will sign off. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. If you have any other questions, John and Mark's email address were on the screen there. You feel free to email them at your convenience. But with that, I will sign off. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, John. Thanks, Mark.